Namaste. In this video, today I would like to share the history and the timeline of Yogic civilization, which is spread over 10,000 years. All the informations are based on archaeology, scriptures, tiny bit of astronomy, and major historical events. And I hope you will enjoy this information. So I have divided this 10,000 years of history in 10 segments, just for the clarity and simplicity. Each segment, starting from Mesolithic Age to the current Internet age, the duration and the time is approximate. In each segment, the major event and major findings, I will try to point it out to give a correlations and the evidence that how from 10,000 years the same knowledge is continuing until now. So the very first one is the Mesolithic Age, or the middle of the Stone Age, which is around 9000 BC. So as of now, based on the Archaeological Survey of India, the oldest evidence is found in this place called Bhimbetka of Madhya Pradesh in central India, where this painting of Nataraja was found, which is form of Shiva holding a trishul or trident. And this painting is dated back to around 9000 BC. Now moving into the second stage, which is Neolithic Age, somewhere around 7000 BC. This is the earliest time of the Harappan civilization, or later it was called the Indus Valley, Saraswati Valley civilization. As you see all the locations right now on the map, earlier was part of India, but now in the present time is northwest India or in Pakistan. I have listed 5 major locations, and the very first 3 locations such as Vedana, Mehergarh and Rakhigadi, these are called the pre-Harappan or the early Harappan civilizations, ranging from 6500 BC to 7000 BC. And during this time, it appears that the female deities were worshipped. As you can see, the ceramic work was done very well, and there are many statues of Shaktis were found, and one of them is listed here. The other, Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, is well known, very mature Indus Valley civilization, which I will talk about it in the next slide. Now moving into the Bronze Age, which is around 3000 BC to 1200 BC, is a very important time of Indus Valley civilization, which is popularly known today. This was the time in which the Harappan civilization reached its peak and maturity. Very urban living. This was the time when it's called early Rigvedic period, which the Rig Veda talked about the famous Saraswati river, that how grand this river flew at that time. But unfortunately, around 2000 BC, the river dried out because of the drought. Thus, the collapse of that civilization, Harappan civilization, started to begin, and it happened. So the people moved towards the east and west, found other rivers to start their own living, and that's the reason a group of people moved near Sindhu river, and from Sindhu the Indus Valley civilization name came in today. Now from the archaeological point of view, if you look at the picture here, there are several things were found, such as swastika symbol, the symbol of Pashupatinath, which is a form of Shiva, then a priest sitting in meditation, Shivalingam itself, and the paintings of people doing yoga postures. And the Harappan civilizations, their own script, or which you can call it pre-Sanskrit script, because later we found that the Sanskrit became the main language in Rig Veda, or is called Vedic Sanskrit. So now moving into Iron Age, which is 1200 BC to 500 BC. As many scholars believe that the Rig Veda was written around 1800 BC, but before that, it was passed down in oral tradition. And now, between this age in Iron Age, the other Vedas were written, which is called later Vedic period. The three Vedas such as Sam Vedas, Yajur Veda and Atharva Veda was written. Brahmans were written, Aranyak and early Upanishads were written. The Brahmi and classical Sanskrit came in existence. So there are two types of Sanskrit. One is the Vedic Sanskrit and other is the classical Sanskrit, which came in existence towards the end of the Iron Age. Now this information is based on the textual and archaeological evidence. Just wanted to add an additional interesting information that the iron was first found in this area in Hyderabad, which is in South India, but very quickly it spread over all across and it was later used by many people in the war. So up until now you have seen the information between 9000 BC to 500 BC. More than half are based on the archaeological information and the other are based on the scriptural evidences. So now I'm going to summarize based on the archaeological evidence and the scriptural information, and then together as the highlights of this whole duration. So if we take the era of between 8000 BC to 2000 BC, there are hardly any scriptures are available. So we will talk mostly based on the archaeological evidences. And to summarize the archaeological evidences, from the yogic point of view, there are several things which is in common and in continuous in the nature until now of the present day. And some of those things are such as statues and painting of Shiva, including Shiva Lingam, Pashupati seal, which is form of Shiva, the mother goddess, yoga asana, which is also related to Shiva, meditation, priest sitting in meditation, or people doing asanas and yoga practice. Then we also find the scripts of writing system. Sanskrit is the language later was used, but we also see here the Proto-Brahmi or pre-Sanskrit scripts. The symbol of swastika was there. And we also find that there were villages to very urban society. And it also suggests that the language changed over time. Natural disaster happened, flood and drought happened, and due to the drought, the Saraswati river totally got dried out and it vanished and made people to migrate from there. They moved to west and to the east. They went all the way up to Persia and even Turkey. So the new settlement happened. So these are the basically summary of those times. Now let's dive into the scriptural evidences between the time of 3000 BC to 500 BC. This is the time of Vedas, which further ended with Upanishads, and then later Darshan Shastra came somewhere around close to 500 BC. So let's first look at the Rig Vedic period, which is considered between 3000 BC to 1200 BC. Though the Rig Veda is considered to be the most ancient scripture written in the world, somewhere around 1800 BC. And before that, these knowledge were orally transmitted over thousands of years. During this time, the male and female had the equal rights in the society. Most of the people who worshipped the deities of nature, such as sun, moon, fire, air, light, etc. This is the time also where the scripts changed from pre-Sanskrit to the Vedic Sanskrit, or such as in the Harappan civilization, which was used as the pre-Sanskrit scripts. Now, as the time moved further, somewhere around 1100 BC or 1200 BC, something interesting started to happen. Though there were 3 additional Vedas were further added, such as Samaveda, Yajurveda, Atharvavedas, but it became more and more ritualistic. The society became more ritualistic. Brahmins and the kings, they started to more emphasize on the ritualistic part. And thus, the male domination started to become more and more in the society. Women were slowly started to not be part of certain rituals. They were not allowed to read certain things. Things like that, that discrimination start to happen. And also during this time, the Prajapati became Brahma, and then Vishnu and Shiva, those trinities slowly came in existence as time passed. The Brahman, Aranyak and Upanishads were written as the Vedas, Samaveda, Yajurveda and Atharvaveda were being added. Vedic Sanskrit slowly changed into classical Sanskrit towards 500 BC. Now you may ask, what was the reason for the decline for the Vedic system? So what happened is most people began to see Veda as cash cow, especially the Brahmins and the kings. And instead of experience the wisdom from the Vedas, they started to use as a money-making machine. So religion became the business through the rituals. The king started to control the religion. So the power, money and war contributed a big way to decline of the Vedic system. Thus the selfish interest started to create discrimination in society. Later you will see the Smriti Shastras, some of the rules and laws clearly reflect that. And that is the time slowly people started to move away from the Vedic system and started to adopt non-Vedic systems such as Buddhism, Jainism, which became the byproduct of this revolt, as you will see further. So before I go further, let me give you a highlights of pre-ancient time between 9000 BC to 500 BC. Based on the astrological observation, means today in the modern time we have computer system available. If you put the planetary position as it's mentioned in the scripture, it can give you a date back in the past. So based on that, it has been calculated that those dates goes back to 20,000 BC. However, the oldest archaeological site is only been found up to 9000 BC. It is also been proved that the river Saraswati dried out in 2000 BC due to drought which stayed for 200 years, as I mentioned previously. People moved to east and west, including Sindhu River, which is popularly known as Indus River, for the new settlement. The Rig Veda was composed around 1800 BC. And then further, the Vedic system started to decline from 1100 BC and slowly and gradually went to even further decline by 500 BC. Upanishads and Darshanas were written somewhere around 700 BC. 16 great kingdoms were formed around 600 BC, and their names are very much visible and read into Mahabharata text, the great epic. The birth of Mahavira and Buddha happened. They are the famous personalities of Jainism and Buddhism. A standardization of Sanskrit grammar happened from Vedic Sanskrit to the classic Sanskrit, which is done by Panini in 500 BC. I also want to mention 3 different dates as is given by the archaeologists or most scholars, and also from the astronomical point of view. So Mahabharata is said to be happened around 950 BC by eminent archaeologist Professor B.B. Lal. Most scholars agree that the Mahabharata happened somewhere around 3102 BC, but Ramayana happened somewhere around 5114 BC. But the Nilkant Oak, who does the calculation based on planetary position, he says the Mahabharata happened around 5561 BC, but the Ramayana happened somewhere around 12,200 BC. This is just for sharing the information, as different people have different opinions. So as we shift into ancient age between 500 BC to 500, there is a major shift because of the Buddhism and Jainism, because all the ritualistic things were happening, and that's what you're going to see in the next slide and further down the road. Now moving into the fifth segment, ancient age, 500 BC to 500 CE. This is the time of Smritis. So all the Smriti scriptures were written mostly starting from this time. The major one is starting with the Darshanas, the school of philosophies, plus some of the Smriti Shastra was written in paper during this time. The great influence of Buddha and Mahavira happened because the society were fed up with the extreme ritualism and casteism. So the popular non-Vedic path were the Buddhism, Jainism, Ajivika, Ajnana and Charvaka. And during the same time, the invasion of Alexander happened. The famous personality Chanakya was also during this time, who helped to establish the Maurya Empire by 321 BC. But the golden period of India actually happened during the Gupta Empire, which is 240 CE. So most of these Smriti texts were written between these two empires, and later it continued as the time passed. So Itihas, early Puranas, Agama, Tantra and other Shastra were written. Also, the foundation of the devotional movement, Bhakti movement, started with Puranas and later came into Agama as well. The Tantra emerged from the later Upanishads. First, the foundation of Darshana happened in Sankhya, and then the devotional movement started to happen in Puranas, and then finally it took the shape of Agama Shastra or Tantra. Now moving into Renaissance age between 500 CE to 1000 CE. During this time, many great personalities were born, and they contributed a lot to the yogic wisdom. And one of them was Adi Shankara. He revived the Vedic system and brought the order and a balance. He was born in 788 CE. He also instituted 4 mathas or institutes at 4 different corners and introduced the Swami order. This was the time of Renaissance period of Vedanta and emergence of great Tantric texts. Major Tantric literature were written during Chola dynasty of South India. The Tantric masters in North such as Satyajoti, Vashugupta, Utpaladeva and Avinav Gupta are the famous ones. The first Muslim invader came to India around 712 CE, which partly ruled in the eastern Afghanistan, which was part of India at that point of time. Many Puranas were written during that time, which basically recorded the history of kingdoms as well. During this time, around 950, the famous Khajuraho temple was built. The sex was not a taboo. This is the temple which was destroyed by the Muslims after 200 years. The Bhakti or devotional movement is starting to take shape, which weakened the Buddhism and Jainism, which was very popular at that time. Ramanuja was another great master, very influential in propagating the devotional Vaishnavism. So around the end of this age, more and more Muslim invaders started to invade great temples in India because they had a lot of money. Such as Muhammad Ghori attacked India 17 times and failed, but on 18th time he had a success and he looted Somnath temple in 1027 CE. And this temple was rebuilt just after India's independence. I do want to mention here that some scholars and historians have found that some of the names in Syria, Turkey, and other places nearby, the Sanskrit names, and they were changed as the time passed. So, from India all the way towards Turkey, there is a great influence of the Sanskrit. And on the other side, if you look at it, the relationship of India goes to Korea, Cambodia, because there was a princess who was married to a Korean king, and it's known fact. Both India and Korea had a postal stamp to recognize that fact. The biggest temple, which was constructed in Cambodia, first it was a Vishnu temple and later it was converted as a Buddhist temple. So as we move into the medieval age, which is 1000 to 1800, this 800 year was a cultural shift because the Islam came in India, the Muslim rulers, invaders came in India. They looted the country as much as they can in the beginning, and later some of them settled down. So by 1500, they started to rule the almost entire India under the name of Mughal Empire, and the flag which you see is the Delhi Sultanate flag. The law of this time forced people to gradually withdraw from outward practices. The physical segregation of sexes and women covering their bodies started to begin. The forced religious conversions, financial burdens, and persecution started to happen, and it happened during those times. 20 million Indians were killed. It's hard to estimate how much money was looted, but thousands of camels were loaded with precious jewelry, gems from all around India, especially temple, all the money, and majority of them were siphoned out from India towards Afghanistan, Turkey, and all those places. However, during this time, more people turned into bhakti or devotion or towards inward practices. The bhakti movement finally swept all around India by 1500, but the left-hand tantric practices, which are non-orthodox in nature, became more secret due to persecution. But the great masters of Nath traditions such as Matsyendranath, Gorakhnath, Swatmaram around 1600 gave great contribution in Hatha Yoga, which we still use it today. Around 1600, Europeans started to come. Dutch, Danish, French, Portuguese, and British. Some had small colonies, but the British finally took over the whole India by 1850. One important thing I must include here, that some of the Muslim scholars, they translated the Indian scriptures such as Vedas, Upanishad, and other from Sanskrit to Persian. And that's how this information, translated information, went to Persia or Middle East. And from Middle East, it further got translated into the West or in Europe. Now moving into the Colonial Age, which is between 1800 to 1947. This is the British colonial era. During this time, the majority of work done by the great masters are mainly the commentaries, translation, and research work on the existing scriptures. During this time, British East India Company gradually started to rule from 1757. They came as a merchant at first, but like other invaders, British main interest was to loot the country. In 1820, the word Hindu started being used by British to divide Indians because there was a significant Muslim population. The key mantra of British was to divide and rule, and they finally ruled entire India by 1858. The slavery, religious conversion of Indians to Christianity continued. A holocaust of 10 to 35 million Indian, as reported by the Guardian newspaper and Shashi Tharoor in his book. They also robbed 45 trillion US dollar of current value. As you can see on the graph, India had 25% of GDP of the world before the British, and when they left, it was less than 5%. They planned and put an education system to brainwash and enslave the Indian mind, which is still in place unfortunately. Many British laws were guided by Orthodox Christian thinking. Some spiritual practices were done in the secret due to the fear of persecution. During this time, the great masters such as Swami Ramakrishna Paramahansa and his disciple Swami Vivekananda, Ramana Maharshi, Sri Aurobindo, Swami Shivananda, Krishnamacharya, and later Swami Rama was born. Now moving into the post-colonial era, which is 1947 to year 2000. During this time, again, the main focus was commentaries, translation, and research. This is the time after 900 years of loot, invasion, persecution, killing, slavery, and division of society by outsiders. India became independent on 15th August 1947. India was left as poor nation to rebuild everything once again. Though British left, but the colonial mindset and the teaching remained. Indians continue to study in the school even today what British told us the history should be. This is the time of the Cold War as well, as India became friends with USSR, and thus the leftist inclination also emerged as the world was divided in two parts. Even today, history is taught as it was portrayed by British or communist think tank in India. Now on the side of yoga and tantra, as the Westerners visit Khajuraho temple and thought that tantra is sacred sexuality. Many Indians still think that tantra is a black magic, both thought due to limited knowledge and their focus. However, many qualified teachers such as Swami Shivanand, Krishnamacharya, Swami Ram, Maharshi Mahesh Yogi, Osho, and his senior students made yoga and tantra popular all around the world. Now moving into the internet age, which is the last segment from 2000 until now. During this time, people are starting to ask questions and trying to validate what was taught to them before. So this is the time again for the research, and some of the translation is still happening from the older text, and many masters writing their commentary. During late 90s, the Indian market gradually opened up and the internet penetrated everywhere. More people started to have access to the information in this new age. Even though evidences are found contrary, but the politics comes in the way, which is resisting the change as what history is being taught to Indians today. a very slow and gradual history correction appears to be coming also on its way. Both Vedic and Tantric traditions are still followed along with the local customs. Great masters and spiritual gurus continue to work around the world who are still in the body and serving millions of people. Popularity of yoga asana, meditation, and Ayurveda are still at the peak around the world. Both East and West are slowly and gradually understanding the reach of tantric practices. Now, going back into the summary of all the things I just covered, of 10,000 years in a quick and dirty way to do a summarization. Going back to 9000 BC, pre-Sanskrit era, then around 3000 BC, Rig Veda starts to appear. Around 2000 BC, the river Saraswati dries out, population moves. And then around 1200 to 500 BC, the decline of Veda happens because of orthodoxy. Upanishads and Sankhya philosophy were written around 700 BC. Buddha, Mahavira, and Smriti texts started to come up around 500 BC. Then Yoga Sutra, though popularly known today, was written around 200 BC. Then the time of Purana starts to come. The Itihas, Purana, the stories around one common era. Then around 800, the revival of Veda and the emergence of Tantra happens. The Bhakti movement or devotional movement happens around 1100, started to pick up by 1500. Then Hatha Yoga comes in a great form around 1600. And Hatha Yoga is part of the Tantra, as the Ayurveda is, which is popularly practiced. So this is the summary of last 10,000 years of this Vedic wisdom. This was the history and the timeline. I hope there was something meaningful for you and it added to your knowledge. This is the civilization which never invaded any other country or never tried to pursue the people of different faith to get converted, because it believed in different path, in diversity, unity in diversity. Many paths leads to the same destination. It always believed in universal peace, universal brotherhood. Sarve bhavantu sukhina, sarve santu niramaya, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kasyit dukh bhag bhaved. The country who had 1/3 of GDP at one point of the world, today is barely 4% now of the total GDP of the world. So that's how the focus of the people have changed from that time and now. That gives you a little bit contrast as what it was before and what it is now. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much for listening. If you like the information, please subscribe, like, and share so that everyone else can also enjoy this.